Hello and welcome back to Hilltop Stovetop, the show where we teach you how to make great meals in an ordinary kitchen. Today we are doing that wonderful, usual Sunday dinner kind of a meal. We're making a pot roast. And a pot roast is relatively simple. It's the kind of thing that you can just pop it in and forget about it. But it's also something that under normal circumstances you'd want to allow, probably 4 hours or more if you're cooking it in a slow oven or in a crock pot. And the reason you want to be cooking it so slow is because usually you make it with a cheaper cut of meat. So if you were making something like a prime rib where the fat is nicely marbled through it and it keeps it moist, that's one thing. But today we're actually going to be using it's a center round, or you could be using a chuck roast. Eye of round, that's the term I was looking for. So you can tell that it doesn't have very much fat throughout it. There's hardly any fat in here. So if we don't cook this right, it'll dry and kind of shrivel up. And but rather than spend 4 or 5 hours waiting for this thing to slow cook, we're going to cook it in our friend the Instant Pot. And that's going to speed things up. All told, it's going to take about an hour and a half to make this meal. Now we've got our roast beef, we've got some carrots, we've got celery, we've got onions, and of course we've got our salt and pepper, tomato paste, garlic, rosemary, thyme, and of course bay leaves. And if you remember from our shows about making stews and when we did the boiled ham, bay leaves are important, not just for the flavor, but because they are a natural meat tenderizer. So that's an important thing in there. Just remember after you're finished cooking it to take these out. You don't serve that with that because these don't break down and they can end up with quite a sharp edge. So you don't want to be eating them whole, but they are great for the tenderizing and for the flour. Or for the flavor. That's what I wanted to say. Now we also want to add some moisture to this, so I've got some beef stock here, about 1.5 cups of that, and I've got 1.5 cups of red wine. If you don't want to put wine in it, that's okay, just increase the amount of stock that you have. So we're going to start off by making sure that this is well browned, because if you just take this hunk of meat and put it in a bunch of liquid, you're going to end up with something that's very gray kind of looking. So we're going to start by browning it. So I've got my Instant Pot. It's already on the saute mode, which means that this is acting like a little hot plate. And again, if you remember, I think it was the show on pulled pork, we analyzed how the Instant Pot worked. But we're going to add some oil to the bottom of this, get that warmed up. Today I'm using avocado oil. Normally I prefer to use olive oil, but since I have avocado oil, I'm going to use that because it has a little bit higher temperature where it will start to burn. So for this, because it's going to be getting quite hot, we'll use that. Now I'm just going to put this onto my cutting board here. And an eye of round is quite a long, skinny roast, and that wouldn't fit in the pot very well. So I'm going to cut this in two. And then the second thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take some paper towel, and you should do this anytime that you're wanting to brown meat. We did this when we made the stew. We're going to take that roast and we're just going to blot it with paper towel. If you had an old stained tea towel, you could use that and then just throw it in the wash right away. Just make sure you do wash it right away, otherwise it'll get pretty stinky. And we're going to take that excess moisture off, because if you don't do that, that makes it harder to brown. Okay. And now we're going to throw this in the Instant Pot, and we're going to brown it about 5 minutes per side so that we end up with a nice crust almost on that. And then we'll come back and add the rest of the ingredients. All right, so we're going to go ahead and pop these in this nice warm pot, and it's going to sizzle like crazy. And I think we've got room that I can put them both in at the same time to do their browning. So we'll come back after a few minutes when I've got this ground all the way around, and we'll be ready for the next step. Okay, so our browning is coming along really well, and one thing I wanted to point out is that it's important to not just do the sides but also the ends. So this is the point where I'm going to tip it up on the end and get those ends done. Now this particular roast was actually a little bit frozen still in the center, but that's not stopping it from browning on the sides. So we're just going to keep browning, and the only thing that's going to happen with it being frozen in the center is it'll take 5 or 10 minutes more in the Instant Pot to cook it. Normally I do prefer to have the meat kind of at room temperature, like have it just in the fridge and then take it out of the fridge for 45 minutes or so before I cook it. But worst comes to worst, you can do it this way. It just wouldn't be quite as tender as if it's been at room temperature first. Okay, so there we got it all nicely browned up. It looks pretty good on the outside, but of course there's still a lot more cooking to come along with this one. But we're just going to set those aside for a moment or two. And while we were off, we did clean up our board and that kind of stuff. Now we're going to take some salt and some pepper and season these up. And our Instant Pot is still on the nice warm saute setting. So then we're going to start with our sauce. There we go. So we've got tomato paste. Now this is not a full can of tomato paste. What we did with the leftovers was we put it into small portions to put in the freezer to use later. Tomato paste and the garlic. Mustn't forget the garlic. Now I've got my little pampered chef thing here, which I love for this sort of process where I'm deglazing it, they call it, where you're taking things off, taking that crusty bit off the bottom of the pot, which adds great to the flavor. And somewhere in here, there is a little piece of the string that fell off the roast. I'm sure I saw it in there. So when my dad would get that at the Sunday roast, he would always go, "Oh, it's the tenderest part." Hopefully this isn't going to be the most tender part of this. Oh. There it is. Whoop. Ooh, that was hot. Okay. Okay, so we've got that taken care of. Now we're going to take a little bit of this red wine, just a splash in there. Mix that all together. And then we're going to take the flour, just a couple of tablespoons of flour. We're going to make a bit of a paste with that. And that's the start of our sauce. Okay, and then we'll put the rest of the wine in. we're just going to let that stay on this saute mode for just a couple more minutes to thicken up just a little bit before we start adding other things to this. Now, if you were doing this in a crock pot or in a roaster in your oven, of course, this part of it would be done on your stove top. And that's where a Dutch oven type of pot is a good thing, so you can do it on top of the stove and then pop it in the oven afterwards. And if you were going to be doing this in the oven, I would say no more than 325. You want to do it at a lower temperature in the oven for this kind of a roast. Now, by adding that flour in there, that's going to keep that sauce from being too watery when it's all said and done, but it's also going to make a fabulous gravy. Okay. So now we're going to take our carrots and our celery. You can also add potatoes. We're not adding potatoes today because we're kind of watching the diet a little bit, but just any kind of hard root kind of vegetable you can add to that. So I'm going to start by putting that in the bottom. And make sure you get that well coated with the sauce. And especially for the potatoes part, because it's that coating it with the sauce that gives it that nice brownness, and especially when you are cooking it in the oven. If you just leave them perched on the top, they'll kind of dry out and be not as pleasant to look at. And then we're going to take our nicely browned meat and just nestle it in there. And we will take some thyme. Now, if I had fresh thyme, that would be great, but we don't. So thyme is one of those things that works well when it's dried. And I want at least a teaspoon of that sprinkled over the top. But I do happen to have some fresh rosemary. So I'm going to add that. Those of you that remember my garden know that I always had this in my garden, but don't have it in this location yet, but coming to a garden near you soon, right? And then, of course, our bay leaves. And then we're going to add in the beef broth. Very last thing is we're going to take these onions and just nestle them in the top. Now we're going to pop the lid on, and with an Instant Pot, make sure it's sealed. And we're going to change that from the saute mode to the manual pressure cooking. And we want to do this for about an hour and 15 minutes. So that's 75 minutes. So with a pressure cooker or an Instant Pot, it's 75 minutes cooking time, but before that it has to get up. No, we wait for it to go on. Okay, before you do the 75 minutes cooking, it has to get up to pressure. But with an Instant Pot, it will do that automatically. So now we take a little pause. We can go and sit down and relax and visit with our guests while this is cooking. And we'll see you in about an hour and a half, probably. Bye. Welcome back. We've just got a minute left on this cooking. And then we're going to do what's called a quick... Oh, there it is. Less than a minute left. We're going to do a quick release on this, and normally I wouldn't put a cloth up on this, but I don't want to get steam on the camera. But we do have to be careful ourselves that we don't get steam on us. So we're going to do a quick release here and let that, just keep that away from the camera. That's the tricky part. And you certainly wouldn't want your hands anywhere near this. Okay, so we're careful. We kept our hands away from the top of the pot and from the steam coming out the top. And now we'll just open her up. And whoop, sure. There we go. Beautiful. Now what we want to do here is to just let this rest the same as we would any other kind of meat. We're going to take these herbs off to the side. And if this had been a really large roast, and where we didn't have room for the vegetables, what we could do at this point is to open it up, quickly take the roast out, throw the vegetables in and seal it up before it has a chance to get cooled down. And then once it has, and then bring it back up and cook it for another 10 minutes with just the vegetables. So that's one option you have if you have a really big roast. So we're going to let this sit for just a couple of minutes before we start trying to carve it. And while we're doing that, we'll take our little skimmer here. That rosemary, when the steam was coming out, it was the rosemary that you could smell the most. But we've got beautiful carrots and celery, and if you'd put potatoes in it, that would have been part of this process too, but they still got holding their shape. And then we've got all of this liquid in there. And there is another video on my channel about how to make gravy. So you can have a look at that if you need help thickening up this gravy. It's fairly thick to start with. It would actually make a really nice soup right now. And of course this particular one has a fair bit of tomato in it, which makes it kind of a tomatoey kind of a soup. All right, so now we're ready to give this a little slice up. And remember, this was a roast that was still frozen in the middle, not solid, but pretty cold. But it's not the kind of meat that you want to be doing a lot of super rare roast beef on this particular cut. When it's a pot roast, it will often come out like this, where it's fairly well done. And then you can serve that up just on top of your vegetables like that. And for those of you that have been watching my videos for a while, and you know I always say that this is great meals in an ordinary kitchen. Just so you know, it's not that we did a full kitchen renovation. We just thought, for the sake of making this a better camera view, we've put a temporary table in just for the sake of the filming. And Coco is lying underneath it, hoping that I'm going to drop something. So, there we go, folks. We have beautiful pot roast and vegetables. and hope that you enjoyed today's filming and that you'll remember to like and subscribe on YouTube. And we will be seeing you again soon in our next video. Bye-bye for now.